Hello and welcome to a video to help you with your GCSE English. This video is for English Literature GCSE. It's the paper 1, it's for the Shakespeare, and this is the question basics, a really simple introduction to how to approach one of the questions. So here's an example question. This is one we've made in the school, but it's the same layout as what you'll get. At the top, you'll see that it tells you where the scene is, so where the passage comes from, and it gives you a quick summary. So read the following extract from Act 1, Scene 5, then answer the questions. At this point in the play, Lady Macbeth has received a letter from Macbeth explaining the witch's prophecy and how the first part has already come true. So it gives you a bit of background. And then at the bottom, the question will be laid out like this. Starting with this speech, explain how you think Shakespeare presents, in this case, Lady Macbeth's power. Write about how Shakespeare presents Lady Macbeth in the speech, how Shakespeare presents Lady Macbeth in the play as a whole. There's 30 marks, and then an additional 4 marks for how well you write it, so your technical accuracy. Now you'll notice it's split into two. The first part of the question looks at the passage, the second part asks you to spring out to the rest of the text. So what do they actually assess in this question? Well, there's 3 main areas. The first assessment objective is that you give intelligent ideas backed up with details. So the key word is ideas. They want your opinions about things, opinions about characters, about themes, about what you think Shakespeare's message is. They don't want you to retell the events or describe things. There are no marks for that. Backed up with details means ideally quotations. Certainly they expect you to use a lot of quotations from the passage they give you. They will expect you to use some quotations from elsewhere in the play. If you can't remember the exact words, they're happy for you to paraphrase, which is to say that they roughly say this, or to talk about specific events. The second assessment objective, analysing the effects achieved by language, form and structure, and using subject terminology. So talking about language means looking in detail at the passage, pulling out different meanings, connotations and techniques used by the language within that passage, and in other quotations from the rest of the play. Form means talking about it as a play, so thinking about what's making it dramatic, how an audience might respond. Structure just really means the order of things. So what's the order of events? What's the order of the way a character develops? Are there any things which compare and contrast across the play? So for example, Lady Macbeth at the beginning, the play is structured so she's strong at the beginning, by the end she falls apart. Subject terminology is in all of your English, language and literature examinations, and we'll come on to the sorts of words you might use for that later. The third main area is looking at links between details and context. So your ability to show that this might have been viewed differently in the early 17th century, or even talking about now, the context now in the 21st century, that's also a context. So you might look at the way in which, for example, women were looked at differently 400 years ago from the way they are now. So they're the 3 main areas. You're also given 4 marks for how well you write it, so how technically accurate your essay is. So we're going to listen to a performance of this speech, because a female actress will do it far better than me, and after that we're going to go back to looking at the question.
Glamis thou art, and Cawdor, and shalt be what thou art promised. Yet do I fear thy nature. It is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Thou wouldst be great, art not without ambition, but without the illness should attend it. What thou wouldst highly, that wouldst thou holily. Wouldst not play false, and yet wouldst strongly win. Wouldst have great Glamis, that which cries, thus thou must do if thou have it, and that which rather thou dost fear to do, than wishest should be undone. Hie thee hither, that I may pour my spirits in thine ear, and chastise with the valour of my tongue all that impedes thee from the golden round, which fit and metaphysical aid doth seem to have thee crowned withal.
So at this point, it's time to get the highlighter out and start highlighting those quotations that you know you can say something about. So I'd be looking at maybe the word promised, this idea that she feels they're guaranteed to be successful. The fact that she fears his nature, but by nature she means that he might do something good. That would link to this notion of him being too full of milk, of human kindness. I think I can do something with that. Catching the nearest way is her way of saying she's going to kill somebody. And ambition is obviously the thing that drives her and her husband on. So they're all words that I think I can do something with. If I don't use all of them, it doesn't matter, but I'm already starting to think in terms of details, and that's a big chunk of the marks that I'm going to get. So illness is interesting. Again, she's using illness to describe ambition and the sort of hatred that they need of people that get in their way. Holily is an interesting word. She's bringing religion into it. Playing false, I can probably do something with that. There's this great idea of people's appearances not matching what they're like beneath the surface. Hie thee hither is interesting, which just means come here, because it's an imperative sentence. She's ordering her husband around. I can probably do something with that. Pouring her spirits in his ear, that's an interesting one. The idea of spirits is interesting. The word pour suggests there's lots of them. Chastising with the valour of her tongue, as if she's in charge, she's sort of fighting, she's the warrior in the relationship. The golden round is the crown. That's quite an interesting idea, the notion of something that's perfect and golden, because neither of these two are. And metaphysical aid, well, that's referring to the spirits, the witches, and we might want to talk about the way in which Lady Macbeth is presented as she might be a witch of some kind. So we've highlighted some of the quotations from the passage we might use. Another thing we're being asked to do is to make links to the rest of the play. So I'd be picking out areas and thinking, what can I link to in terms of quotations and events later on? And I think probably about 3. You've only got 45 minutes, so you're not going to write pages and pages. So my first one is this notion of nature, because I think she's unnatural. So I could link it to when she talks about her woman's breasts, and she wants them removed. That's obviously an unnatural action. When she talks about the baby, the smiling baby, and with its boneless gums, and that she'd have dashed the brains out. So I can link to a few quotations that show that Shakespeare at the start of the play presents her as unnatural, and this is part of that. And then maybe I'll link to the end when she goes mad and the nurse and the doctor talk about her with her infected mind, because that's something that I think I can play around with. It. This unnaturalness turns to something infected. In terms of context, obviously this is going to go against notions of a 17th century view of women as domestic, as mothers. Somebody who is taking control in this way, but also talking about being a mother in such a horrifically sadistic and offhand manner. So what will I do next? The idea of playing false is quite interesting. She's deceitful, and deceit's one of the key themes, isn't it? This idea of pretending to be something you're not. So it links to that notion of the innocent flower, that you're the serpent under it. I can talk about serpent a little bit, the ideas of poison and the sort of hidden venom that she carries around. A little bit later on, she thinks that a little bit of water can wash away their guilt, wash away the blood. And this idea that if you wash away what you can see, you'll be okay inside. You won't have any guilt inside you. And that's obviously wrong. And then I can go to the end where that damned spot, that appearance, she can't get rid of the appearance of blood. Even when other people can't see it, it's still a stain that she can see. In terms of context, that guilt, she refers to doing things holily. That relates to religion. I can talk about it as a particularly religious age, conventionally Christian age, and that she's getting her comeuppance. This, in terms of Christian morality, she deserves this to an extent because of the evil that she's done. Okay, finally, the way that she's going to chastise him, that she talks about having valour. She's very dominating. She says when they're going to kill King Duncan, leave all the rest to me. So she uses these imperatives, these orders, to boss her husband around. She asks him if he's a coward. She asks him if he's a man. So we've got this kind of strange, back to the unnatural, this inversion of gender roles as far as they would have been concerned in the early 17th century. when she dies, she's not dominating anymore. She's forgotten about. So when Macbeth does his tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow speech, he says she should have died hereafter. She shouldn't have died now. So at the end of the play, all that domination has gone. She's become rather a pathetic figure who kills herself, and there's no time for anybody to grieve her, and maybe even nobody to grieve her. In terms of context, the Elizabethans would have seen her behaviour as quite extraordinary, really. The husband is supposed to be the lord. It shouldn't be the wife who's going to chastise you of her tongue and poor spirits and order you around. So again, they might see that as an inevitable consequence of her behaviour. So let's go back to the question, and what the question is really focusing is on. Starting with this speech, explain how you think Shakespeare presents Lady Macbeth's power. So Lady Macbeth is the topic of the speech, but the question will always say, how do you think Shakespeare does it? How does Shakespeare present? How does Shakespeare present? You've got to show that you understand this as a play. Lady Macbeth is not a real person. There was a historical Lady Macbeth, but she was not like this. It's about how Shakespeare has invented her on stage, how he's created her. So make sure in your answer that paragraphs begin with phrases like, well, Shakespeare presents Lady Macbeth as. So Shakespeare is doing this. She's not a real person. Or Shakespeare presents Lady Macbeth using emotive language, imagery, powerful verbs, whatever it is you want to focus on. So, if we're going to write 3 paragraphs, the first one might begin, Shakespeare presents Lady Macbeth as unnatural. The second one might begin, Shakespeare also uses her dialogue to link Lady Macbeth to the theme of appearance. We mentioned the theme, we're showing we know it's not a real person, it's a play. And then maybe a final paragraph. Lady Macbeth is also presented as dominating through her dialogue, and then we can talk about that. I don't think you need to have an introduction that just says something like Shakespeare presents Lady Macbeth in a range of ways. That's a complete waste of time. If you've got a clever overview of Lady Macbeth, that would be a nice introduction. Equally, at the end, there's no point saying in conclusion and just repeating yourself. Only offer a conclusion if you've got something genuinely new as an overview to offer at the end that you think sums things up. But if you're in doubt about it, you can't think of a conclusion, then don't do it. Just end on a good point. So, technical terms, what are they expecting? Well, the obvious one is to refer to it as a play, which might seem obvious, but you should be surprised how many candidates refer to it as a novel, which would be really, really bad. Do not do that. And the writer is a playwright. That's a word that's worth learning to spell. Please don't forget the W in the middle. Or you can just refer to him as Shakespeare. Again, you'd be surprised how many candidates don't know how to spell Shakespeare, even though it's written many times in the exam paper. They will not look well upon that when they're giving you 4 marks for accuracy if you can't spell his name. Phrase, if it's a short quotation, that's a technical word. If it's something that's not literally happening, then you can use metaphor or imagery to describe it. You can talk about how Shakespeare structures the play, that will get you marks. If you talk about scenes or acts, that's a technical term, it's a structural term, it's also a form term. Dialogue, for when they're talking to each other, that's part of the form. If you can talk about tragedy, or what is tragic, that would be good. They would expect that, particularly if you're writing about Macbeth himself. You might talk about the tone or the mood of the scene and how it changes. You might find something to talk about to do with juxtaposition or contrast, which are very similar things. Obviously, as with any other English exam, any references to nouns and verbs, adverbs, that kind of thing, all completely relevant, and it will get you marks. Now, something else you might want to write about, because it will get you marks, is the effects that are achieved. So you might think in terms of the audience, in terms of the tension they might feel, if the climax is reached, like when Macbeth dies or the murder, something like that. Suspense might be created about how things can turn out. The audience might be horrified. Or they might feel pity or pathos, as a posh way of saying pity, essentially. There might be a dramatic contrast between the way a character was and the way they are now, or between 2 different characters. If you're going to talk about contrasts, putting in the word dramatic is good because it shows that it's a contrast on stage rather than on the page, and always, always refer to the audience. Do not refer to them as readers. This should be seen on stage. It shouldn't be something which you're reading in a book. It's just something you do in schools. So we're going to look now at what one of the paragraphs might look like. This is not necessarily a level 9 paragraph, but it does the things that they want you to do. And if you're not sure how to write it, this gives you a sense of what a good one would look like. So, Shakespeare presents Lady Macbeth as unnatural within this passage. Nice, clear opening sentence. For example, we're going to go straight into giving you some quotations. Her reference to nature implies she desires something unnatural. Indeed, moreover, furthermore, are all ways of saying to the examiner, I'm going to build and deepen this point. Indeed, her use of the verb fear suggests that goodness and healthily normal approaches to situations repel and disgust her. This is further emphasised, so doing a link, when she scorns her husband's milk of human kindness. The noun milk has connotations of comfort, childbearing and motherly qualities, all things she spurns in her quest for power and control. Later, when she meets her husband, Lady Macbeth describes her smiling baby and how she would dash the brains out rather than surrender their planned assassination. Shakespeare uses this image of murder to present both her ambition and her unnatural characteristics. The detailed smiling, notice how we're taking a slightly longer quotation and going into it. The detailed smiling shows the trust the baby has to the murderous mother, like the trust King Duncan has for his murderous warrior Macbeth. The verb dash implies a particularly vicious, violent action, representing her desire to shed blood and forcing the audience to recognise the unnatural lack of parental love. Later in the play, Shakespeare shows her unnatural aspects as being part of what destroys her. Her nurse and doctor describe her using the metaphor of having an infected mind, the adjective infected implying that she is sick, perhaps suggesting that her unnatural desires have spread through her like a disease. The moral seems to be that ignoring what is natural will always end negatively, as it is arrogant to think that a person can do this. In the early 17th century, a woman who put her own ambitions ahead of her role as mother would probably have been seen as someone who would inevitably face punishment for challenging the natural order as they saw it. So we've got ideas, quotations, uses technical language, talks about the structure of things because it compares before and after. And then we have a little reference to context at the end saying that this might have been viewed differently. It's not a perfect paragraph. It could go into more depth and be more technical about things. It could certainly be a bit more conceptual in its ideas, but that's a really good, solid paragraph. So, I hope you found this helpful. That's the end of this video.